wanted to do this from the beginning, and a little better. And I wanted to go way back when I hit puberty. This would happen around the age of 8. So let's call this the start of K through 12. So at that time, I hit puberty. I was like, wow, food is now delicious. We're getting into near the end of elementary school, in the beginning of middle school, as we're getting closer to 9, 10. I was already over 200 pounds. Actually, if I remember, I was already 225 going in. By the time I was out of middle school, heading on to 13, I was already 315. A big jump in that window. So here we are, just eating copious amounts of food. Bread being one of the bigger culprits, and as well as peanut butter. But even before this, some things from family help kind of happen, right? You know, habits of coming from school, great-grandparents, grandparents, you're gonna eat. Could be anything from a ravioli to chicken, whatever was made, and a glass of milk. Anyone who knows me now knows I'm not one for drinking milk. And I think it was the drinking the milk day in and day out growing up that did it. Definitely didn't help with the weight gain. Whatever. Fine. We started off there. Sweet. So as we move through this early K through 12, right? Late elementary, middle school, football, hormones, all that good stuff going on. We get into high school, right? So we got 13 to 18. This is where I would go from that 315 up to the 400 pounds. Like I said, I was a big boy. I was rolling. Okay. But in the beginning of that, right, I was still playing football, still relatively active. Actually, I was very active. I was very busy. I wasn't just doing football. I was in honors classes, AP classes. Well, I was in beta club. Something about a membership, whatever. Different honor society. I eventually became student body president. So that was on my plate. I was always doing something, always busy. I was the kid. You wanna know how much of a big back I was? I was the kid. Everyone would have their fights at lunch. No, not Shamar. You know what Shamar was doing? While y'all out there being ratchet and was throwing hands, I saw that as my opportunity to beeline to the front of the line. And you best believe I got the good food too. Y'all out there strangling, ripping out weaves or whatever. No, Shamar was eating. I was being thick-necked. Okay, big back. I didn't care less about y'all scrapping because half the time it ended with both parties being embarrassed anyway. My embarrassment came from just being big. We have a gathering of all these foods, right? And I used my activity as quote unquote as an excuse to eat more. And honestly, if I wasn't as active as I was, not considering playing football, doing track and field, as well as my own training on my own, I would have been bigger a lot sooner. And probably would have sped my way to nearly 600-pound life. Dr. Now would have had me on his show, which conveniently enough, and funnily enough, was probably one of my favorite shows to watch while I was eating. So through all that, right, we're speed running, kind of getting a summary of all of this. But during those high school years with all the activities, like I said, I used it as an excuse to eat more. And anywhere I was probably burning probably anywhere from like 8,000, 9,000 calories a day if you want to consider football practice and the structured lifts I had, because I did have a strength and conditioning coach. We did have actual structured programs. The summers were even worse. I'm gonna get to that in a second, right? But on top of, sometimes I ate breakfast. I wasn't really a breakfast person. I might go in there and get it if they had like the breakfast pizza, goated, always ate those. French toast sticks, goated, always ate those, right? But lunch, I would also eat lunch too, and sometimes also the pen too, like baked chicken, gone. Munching. Sometimes I would eat other people's chicken because they thought it was dried out, and it wasn't that good. Not for Shamar. I had no problem eating like 4 breasts for lunch. Of the chicken variety. Probably not much better, but you get what I'm trying to say here is like you're eating like 4 big chicken breasts on top of having chocolate milk. And so during that time between the 2013 and 2017 period, a different area of finding myself, right? So we had all of that going on academically, right? I mentioned I was very busy. And one of the things that kind of contributed to that was I had a goal of always wanting to do physics. And kind of in high school, I started to realize that, I don't think my math capabilities are as great as I would like to believe. But I still trucked on, right? Algebra, it was all right. Geometry, past that, whatever. AP Calc, tried hard, extremely hard, and would eventually pass both of those tests. But it was a different type of challenge. And I think that one of those sudden awakenings for me definitely didn't help with the comfort of food. And so during that time, right, before we get to weight loss, we have to talk about the weight gain. You have the mental capacity or the mental obstacles that come with that, and also social aspects of that. So I mentioned that during school, but during the summertime, I'm home. Other than football practice, I wasn't doing much. So your boy was munching. We was eating peanut butter sandwiches, chicken. What else was in the freezer didn't matter. It got eaten. Was in the refrigerator, definitely got eaten, right? And some of my great aunt taught me, was one of the first to really teach me how to cook. So I learned how to make things, especially baked goods. Look, any baked goods, really not safe. If there's chocolate involved, definitely not safe. So breads, your biscuits, your loaves, cookies, that was the beginning of all of that. And it would carry on into once I got to high school and I could cook more for myself and I was able to make my own dinners. So all of that going on, they added up over time. I would begin to try and lose weight near my junior year into my senior year. That didn't help. Processed foods went out the window. Ate everything, didn't matter. I realized kind of had to change your eating habits, and that's actually when the biggest gain happened. I went from 335-ish. Granted, I was only in the boot for a month, and somewhat okay, decent in terms of playing time, 2 months. So within that time, I went from maybe 330, 340 to 385. 385, I might add. Okay, but that's because my eating habits didn't change, right? Growing up in the Southeast, we had things like Waffle House, Bojangles, and I was eating Bojangles. I remember when you could get the 2 pieces, but I always just got 2 breasts because thighs are cool, whatever. Legs, weak. I don't know why people eat those. The legs, the last thing I want to eat. Wings is probably next to it, even weaker. So I just ended up getting 2 breasts, biscuit, fries, 2 sides. Sometimes I got macaroni. Sometimes I would get green beans because I was trying to feel skinny. I was trying to feel not as fat. It didn't work. And the Bo biscuits also came with that meal. It was $6-ish. And then, it was GG's if my brother or my mother got one, because they didn't finish. Well, my brother maybe. Sorry, y'all ate just as much as I did. My mother. Now, shouts out to the parents that don't always finish their food, because sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. Because those dinners and lunch, trust me, they were not going to waste, because I finished it. We talking sample dinner would be 2 Bojangle box, maybe 3 pieces of chicken, 2 biscuits, and 4 Bo-Berry biscuits. 4 Bo-Berry biscuits. I think calorically that probably adds up to 2,400, roughly, somewhere in there. And that's a lot, and that's just for the biscuits, not even the rest of the dinner, and not also considering the rest of my day. And sweet tea was definitely, I love sweet tea. I still love sweet tea now. I don't drink it as much because I really just prefer coffee and water and the occasional energy drink, but that's what I preferred. This would go into graduating, and at the day of graduation, I had clocked in around 400 in 2017. I'm like a giant blueberry was just rolling to get my diploma. But that was one of the first wake-up calls. And then I would go to the University of South Carolina when I would spend my next 4 years, 2017 to 2021. But as we get into 2017, 2018, that's when I started to realize a couple things. And actually, I did a little walkthrough. It'll be like a separate video. I'll probably end up talking over it in some of the clips as well, where I mentioned that aspect of the weight loss part and what I did during that summer. I realized that I'm a very social eater, whether it's around family or around friends. So my first year, I was like, well, I got to walk around campus. That's great. And this is where I was like, oh, my physical activity throughout the day has gone up, right? High school, our classes were relatively close together, but now in college, I may only have 3 or 4 classes in a day, but they're pretty far apart. So we're actually starting to lose weight. So between that first year, I actually went from like 400 to like 385-ish maybe. But like I said, social eating, because I didn't really make friends. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't really care for anybody. I just wanted to go to class, come back, study, and eat. I actually would lift, but not as frequently as I did in high school. And that was more so, I actually don't even have a reason, other than I just studied all the time. There really wasn't anything stopping me from going to the gym. Actually, we have a phenomenal 2 gyms when I was there. You had your black gym and you had Strom Thurmond. Great gyms. Actually, I'm pretty sure Strom Thurmond looks even better now than when I was there. My diet during that time was, during the day, I would have like maybe 2 Nutri-Grain bars. If I was feeling spicy, because we had meal plans, so we had meal swipes. And so for our meal swipes, I was allotted 3 a day. Didn't always use all 3, so sometimes I would like double them up on the weekends, because I think you just had to use them all by the end of the week. I believe we had 21 for the week, but you couldn't use any more than 4 in a day. Solid, right? It counts for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and I think either dessert or snack. Depending on like a Tuesday or Thursday, I might go to Einstein's Bagel and get me a nice little toasted cinnamon raisin with the double egg and Swiss. Double egg and Swiss. Fire, by the way, I recommend, highly recommend, right? I would get that. For dinner, those turkey burgers hate to see me coming. That turkey burger on whole wheat with Swiss, look, them lunch ladies knew me. Starbucks ladies knew me too. Okay. Later in the year, I started to find this other place that had taco bowls. That was their biggest mistake, getting rid of that. It really was. But these taco bowls, they were big. Them bowls were. Let me put y'all on something. Most places, I've learned a few things. Some big back tips, right? Chicken and steak, because of how they're cut, they tend to watch a bit more. Pulled pork, however, because they use the little tongs, most people I've come across don't, and I say sometimes, don't care about the portion size. So I usually would always get more if I compare the other 2. And pricing could be a thing, but if you do the other 2, just to put y'all on some game. No, don't be a thick neck. The whole point is to not do that, right? Then that spring 2018, I would become an RA. I was an RA for the next 3.5 years. That's a story in and of itself. Great times, really was. That's all I gotta say, right? Made friends there, and I became a bit more active because now I'm kind of working on top of going to class. So we had to do rounds of the building, walking up and down stairs, and I started to realize, between walking up and down stairs, going to classes, this being fat thing is not fun. Actually, it's kind of really getting old, and I mean really getting old. So we got to figure something out here. And so with that, right, I'm like, I've got an idea. Maybe we should start to lose weight. But unfortunately, that wouldn't happen until we get to about another year in. It started to become more. And we get closer to the summer. Actually, we get to the summer of 2019. Actually, specifically, May 27th, 2019. I'm like, I've had enough. I've had enough. I'm tired. Physically, actually, and mentally, I'm tired. You get over just being fat. You really do. So, well, the main reason was because I want to stop sweating so much. Because, you know, it's embarrassing to go from class to class and you look like you just ran a marathon on your 10 to 15 minute walk from the science building to your English building. And have to carry an extra shirt with you so you don't look like the typical fat kid sitting in the back of the class sweltering. But during that summer, doing my typical RE internship things, I would begin to be like, oh, you know, maybe it's time. And during all throughout this time, from 8th grade on, I dreamed, but I imagined, like, you know, what if I wasn't a tubby, right? So I got some inspiration from other fitness infos, you know, six-pack shortcuts. Who actually remembers who that is, right? Six-pack shortcuts, anyone? Anyway, like your Omar Isofs, especially with weight loss, biggest one for me, Obese to Beast. Followed his journey and kind of watched from there. It's like trying to learn so much about both exercise and nutrition. Now, with the exercise, I mentioned Omar Isofs, and I knew of Jeff Nippert at the time. I would see your Jeff side, so I would get different aspects of fitness. There is one that I do have to admit, for a very small period of that summer, and I mean small, like maybe a couple weeks, your boy may have almost got sucked into the V Shreds train. Now look, I know, we collectively all don't like V Shreds, but hear me out. At the time, that's what I had. That's where I went. Okay, then I realized, not a big fan, right? Not a big fan. So kind of jumped off that train real quick. With that summer, I would actually go from, well, I think I technically started at 375. I would go from 375 to 322, right? 50 pounds in the summer, right? So when you're doing upper, lower, fifth day was probably a combination of the two. But generally what I would do is I would run before my lifts. It was mostly agility-based drills that I just knew from football because it was that and V-shreds. Yeah, I know. Trust me, I know. During that time, my diet was relatively controlled. I would implement intermittent fasting, and I wouldn't break my fast until noon. Well, it started off was 10, and it went to 11, and until noon. And I would have 2 bologna sandwiches and a bag of chips. I don't recommend that. Don't do that. Not great at all. And then if I wanted to eat, like in the middle of the day, I would have tuna. Cans of tuna, whatever. And then for dinner, it usually cycled, right? Dinner was one of those ones I didn't meal prep, I make, and I still technically do that to this day. It was sometimes chicken breast, see a theme here, and broccoli, or green beans, sometimes. Or it'd be salmon or tilapia, and broccoli, right? So I usually cycled somewhere around all of those, just keep my life simple. If I just made one of those, and then one of those sides, sometimes it was a pasta, sometimes it was a protein pasta. It just made my life easier. Another thing that helped was cut out the tea. That was heartbreaking. Not gonna lie, that summer was a little rough. I was having tea withdrawals. I would have sweet tea one time. Like Saturday was my refeed days. Me and my parents would go Chinese buffet. Also hated to see me coming, because I'm telling you right now, those 6 plates, oh, I didn't even mention that. Early K through 12. Let me tell y'all, football season, look, Golden Corral and Ryan's was it. He had Shoney's, but I wasn't a fan. Yeah. Golden Corral and Ryan's. Ryan's didn't even exist anymore. But Golden Corral, that Bourbon Street chicken, and those rolls. I don't even need anything else, honestly. Yeah, I don't even need anything else. Those two right there held it down, right? Thick neck. One time we went after a football competition. No, weightlifting competition. I think I was like 7 plates in? 6? 6 or 7 plates in? Either way. And the remember when I said about the baked goods? The brownies? Y'all. That was an extra 2 plates alone. We're talking like at least a good like 6 brownies. Easy. But one thing I didn't notice with intermittent fasting, right? Physically, your stomach adapts to eating less, right? So it gets smaller to account for less volume. So over time, actually eating at a buffet became very difficult. So the 6 plates went down to like 4 or 3. Wasn't less than 3 because don't waste your time going to a buffet. I'm gonna be honest. But I always get the lo mein, the shrimp, the salmon. Salmon was a little sketchy. And he had like this chicken. Probably was, anyway. So I'm about to get canceled. We're moving into 2020. We're still trickling on down, right? Beginning of 2020, I'm actually made it out of the 300s, right? I went down to 290. So I was like, sweet milestone, right? We're in there. So we keep going throughout the year. And COVID starts to make its way, and actually make it, by the time that happens, right, during that springtime, because then we get into the shutdowns. By that time, I was down to like 270. Okay, so during that time, that summer, or that era, I actually went into running. So I wasn't lifting as much. So my physical body looked very different, even having had lost another 30 pounds. So by the end of that summer, in August of 2020, we would end up coming back to school anyway. I was 239 essentially. So, but a very different 239 because I focused mostly on mobility, which I wish I recorded because I got really close to being able to do a full front split, but I messed that up by not recording any of that. And I would also start practicing jiu-jitsu at that time, which of all the sports I play is my favorite. I haven't gone to the 4th one, so I've only mentioned 3 so far. Football, track and field. I only threw, like I said, shot put and discus, and then now jiu-jitsu, right? So I would practice that, and that would help keep my weight in between that range. And I would compete and get better at it and start to do that while lifting, while also learning how to program more and kind of better. I wouldn't get better until like another 2 years later. We get up until graduation 21, I'm like 265. I layer between 265 and 275. From 21, there's really not much else to add in there. From 21 up until latter half of, what year are we in? Latter half of 22, then I would make some changes, and I'm like, okay, no, and I would get down to 240. So I actually started to pick up some different bodybuilding-esque training, as would also start rugby. That's sport number 4. And so pairing those two together, I would get strong, manage my weight pretty well, and then I would continue on with that and staying in between that range. By the time I graduate from University of North Texas in 2023, that summer, I'm like, okay, all right, we've been layering around 245, 250. I know I can get there. I know this is not the smallest I can get, whatever. And that's when near the end of that, I would really try to pick up bodybuilding. I actually changed my programming, and I actually might review this one because it's very unique. Because I would do a 6-day split, mainly because I did legs 3 days a week. My legs got bigger than what they were. Legs got big. It was a time. I will say that was a time. Fun, but a time nonetheless. But by the end of 2023, creeping into 2024, Shamar will have went from lower 230s at the end of that summer to I would get to 215. I realized 215 might have been a little too far. a little too far. And I'm like, okay, 215 might be a bit much. I feel slightly better at 225. I feel my best between 230 and 240. I don't take back having lost the weight. I really don't. Regardless of how anyone feels, I feel healthier. My joints don't hurt as much. Sure, there's aches and pains really from previous injuries, but I don't feel tired all the time. My head isn't foggy. I don't feel like I need to sleep all day. I don't snore for the most part. Right? That was actually one of the bigger changes I saw, right? I'm not out of breath walking up a flight of stairs unless I like to hit legs or something. Okay, things became easier. Cravings started to go away. Not all of them. Like I said, you put a plate of cookies in front of me, it's game over. But a lot of things changed in that weight loss. But for here, this is more of one, a personal connection, two, a story to tell, to add, but also simply warning. This is not fun. And also losing weight can happen unhealthily. And I actually will probably elaborate more when I talk about my time losing weight during that summer and overall, because yes, there are good things when it comes to weight loss, but there are realities of it that I think people want to shy away, especially if you don't do it the right way. Being that large, there comes with mental challenges. There comes with a very not safe way. I mentioned I went from 375 to 322 in a span of like 55 days. That's fast. Granted, I was big and I was relatively untrained and my nutrition was trash, but that's still relatively quick. And you can get obsessed with steps. Don't get me wrong, I still hit my steps. At minimum, I hit 10,000 steps a day. My minimum days, especially coaching now, is like 15K. 20 if I'm like really active, right? And that definitely helped when I went from that 250 to that lower 230s, mid 220s, is because I started to coach more, right? 2022 to 2024, I would become a sports performance, strength and conditioning, personal trainer, whichever you want to call it, relatively all the same thing, if we're being honest. It's just a title. It's really not that deep. But I would start to coach more, whether it be running kids camps and demonstrating how to do a sled push and ace skips and sprinting with form. So all of those added in my own training, right? Physically, I became very active, and that's a key takeaway from this, is the increased overall physical activity. It's very easy, especially in college and then going outside of college, to become less physically active. And that's where sometimes if you didn't start off big, the weight thing starts to switch. Those who are relatively active and fit get out to the workspace and they may have a job that doesn't require them to be too physically active, things flip on ahead and you become very sedentary. Ultimately, is building a good relationship with food, okay? I'm not saying get a cookie every day. That's more so for me. But you never have to not get a cookie. And actually, I am of the philosophy, and I may cause problems with this, and I frankly do not care. I'm of the belief that if we treated food, or we talked about food when it came to addiction and health, the same way we would view alcohol, I believe the conversation would look very different. So one of the different things is because food is something we all need to survive alongside with water. But if we would have an honest conversation about how it is you can get addicted to certain things, and we wouldn't be so sensitive when someone doesn't want to partake in something because of an emotional attachment they may have, people may be less judgy. Or you simply could just not care. Because at the end of the day, it is your health and not someone else's. I find it strange when someone says they don't want to drink. Fine. Someone says they don't want dessert. Interesting. And I believe that becomes more of a reflection of that person's own self-capabilities and a reflection of their inability to make the changes necessary. But we're not going to be preachy here, right? All in all, this is just the first part. This whole series will travel and have parts. There's different phases. a nice little long story time. And as we come into the new year, I'd expect great things.